Very good morning. So welcome back. This morning I have ventured down to Bletchley railway station. Now there's a very good reason for that, and there has been certain news which has broken out in the last week. Now I'm just heading down the stairs onto platform 6, which is one of the two platforms, the other being platform 5, of where the class 230 Vivarail units operate for the Marston Vale line. Now, the news that the break is regarding to the beginning of the process of administration for Vivarail. So, what has happened? All services have been suspended until further notice, and we are going to discuss who are Vivarail and what do they do. What does this mean for passengers, and what does the future hold? So, welcome back once again to another Down the Line episode as we look at the rise and fall of Vivarail. So, for those of you who don't know, the Marston Vale line is the intermediary line between Bletchley and Bedford. There are several stops along there, just to name a few. You've got Fenny Stratford, Woburn Sands, Sturtby, home of the famous brickworks, which I have visited before, on towards Kempston Hardwick, and then terminating at Bedford. Now, that was formerly the Varsity line, which was the Oxford to Cambridge line, and there are future plans in regards to the reopening of that line. Now, if you can see just behind me, there is an outstick of the first part of the new footbridge, which will connect to the gangway up above. So that's coming along, and to be honest, that can't come quick enough. This line desperately needs a reliable set of services. Now, if you take COVID into consideration, that's something that no one foreseen, and to be fair, I would take that part out and say, really, you can't put that down to that. However, it's not just been in COVID times where problems have arisen. Now, this line has seen many units. It's seen 117s, 121s, 150s and 153s. And that goes back to, using Silverlink, London Midland and obviously London North Western. So, as we then look into it, from 2019 is when the Class 230 former D-stock units came into service. Now, I'm going to have a little look back, and I'm going to let you know on who Vivarail are and what was their project.
Vivarail is a British rolling stock manufacturer based in Southam, Warwickshire. They were formed in 2012 and are led by former Chiltern Railways chairman Adrian Shooter. Vivarail's main project is the conversion of the retired London Underground D-stock into two new classes to be used for National Rail services. They bought 156 motorcars and 70 carriages of old stock in 2014. A year later, a prototype was produced, and before a year-long trial on the Coventry to Nuneaton line, this ended up being cancelled after the unit caught fire. The Class 230s entered service in 2019 along with its fellow Class 484, which is used on the Island line based on the Isle of Wight. They have had a mixed start to life, with the units breaking down or struggling in certain weathers, amongst many other problems. Unfortunately, on December the 1st of this year, Vivarail entered administration along with a temporary suspension of the Class 230s on the Marston Vale line on the same day.
Right, so now you're pretty clued up on who Vivarail are and what their project was. I'm going to give my own opinion on it. Now, in the theoretical sense, reusing old stock and using them for modern branch lines such as this is a fantastic idea. However, when you put it into the practical sense, and after speaking to a few people who have driven them and maintained them, they have been full of problems. And the phrase that I usually hear is that the project was rushed. And I can quite believe that, if I'm honest, just by what has happened. There was a lot of things that go on, especially when it goes into the seasonal sense. If you go to this time of year, for example, now, of course, been in service since 2019, that's not very many years. It's only 3 years. But when it gets to this sort of time of year and the leaves fall on the line, they slip and slide like no tomorrow. And if you then go into the summer months when it's really, really hot and we have our heat waves, they overheat massively and quite easily, a bit too easy from what some of the people have told me. But now you could argue that happens with other units and bits and bobs along the line, and it does, let's be honest. But when you look into, and of course this is way beyond this video and really someone for Vivarail to tell us, when you look at the really finite details of the project and you go through it with a fine-tooth comb, you could probably pick bits out that go, that could have been better, that didn't need to be done, or that could have been better, and so on and so forth. But, you know, the shameful thing is when you have strikes like we have quite often nowadays, and you combine that with this, it's not just like a 48-hour gap of no trains. This is until further notice, so that's not going to be happening for some time. And I hope a resolution is formed, because for passengers that use this, and we'll touch on the impact for them, but this can't go on. And a replacement bus service, for me and for a prolonged period of time, it just does not cut it.
As you can see, the platforms 5 and 6 at Bletchley won't see a Class 230 until a resolution is found.
Right, so we've started off quite well, and I'm hoping I'm giving enough information to really get you in the loop. And to be fair, as we're walking up the steps, you can just see the footbridge and the new platform 7. It's coming along nicely, it really is. And like I said, can't wait for that to start, because this line really needs a reliable service. It really, really does. But this isn't the end of the video. The footbridge is going to connect up there, by the way. So I'm now going to get in the car and do the short drive to Fenny Stratford. So bear with me and I will see you there. So that seemed like a very sped up quick drive. Don't worry, I drove safely. We're now at Fenny Stratford, and it's been some time since I did some filming here. As you remember, I think it was my second or fourth episode, which is way over a year ago now. Well, not by much, probably about 14 months ago, that I did a piece on this station, and hasn't changed a bit. It really hasn't. And stations like this along the Marston Vale don't change that much. So the difference now, and the reason why I've come here as well as Bletchley, is because with Bletchley you've got the West Coast Main Line as well as the Marston Vale, so there are still services. But when you've got a station like Fenny Stratford, albeit with a very, very nice station house, you are quite a victim of this suspension, purely because this relies on that heavily, and it's the only service. Now you can take East West Rail into account and say, could this be a station on there? I think they haven't really decided yet, because there was plans for this to not be part of it, and then it could be, so that's another issue. But let's discuss what this means for passengers. So this line, and from what I've seen as a passenger, this station in particular, and so do the others in between Bletchley and Bedford, they carry people on their everyday working life. There's a lot of students. There's quite a few schools up and down here, and also with the West Coast Main Line at Bletchley, it connects up to the Midland Main Line at Bedford. Now, for people going on their journeys, holidays, going to school, going to work, that is a broad group of people which are going to suffer from this. And like I said, with the replacement bus service, seating numbers and things like that is going to be a lot less than what a Class 230 would carry. So there's going to be a lot of problems, and I feel if you're someone who relies heavily on this line, you're going to be met with a load of problems. And again, this is no fault of theirs. This is something that has happened, and it's something that, like I said, at Bletchley, it needs a very, very quick resolution. So it's quite hard to determine really what outcome we are going to have. And it's like I touched on with the South Western Railway side of things on the Island Line. There's been no news of, like I said, there's been no news of that having to close. Now, what does that say to me as a first instance? Does South Western Railway have more facilities in place in order to carry on those services? But from what I read in the article in regards to the the London North Western runs, with Vivaraill, they're not going to be able to carry out the required maintenance to be able to keep them going up to the standards and things like that. So again, you've got to appreciate that they're taking safety into account, and they're not just going, right, we'll just run with it, because if they feel that there's a risk element or there could be some issues, it's not worth going into that ballpark. It really, really isn't. But this station's quiet on the best of times, and obviously has I think 2 services an hour, 1 in each direction. And I think the only thing that's going to wake this up is when you get the occasional freight services. You get the the Toton Yard to Dollans Moor, you get Derby Lichchurch Lane sometimes going down to Wembley, and you get the Old Dolby services as well, Kings Norton to Euston, things like that. So you can see there's a red signal, and there's going to be one for quite a time.
Being reliant on stations like Fenny Stratford is something that is important to commuters, and they need to help them thrive, along with plenty of volunteers that do help along with the Marston Vale Line Community Rail Partnership. And the stations may seem quiet, but a lot of time and a lot of love does go into them, as you can see here at Fenny Stratford.
Now, as you've just seen, I've just brought up some pan-outs of the Marston Vale Community Rail Partnership and the Friends of Fenny Stratford Station. Now, for those of you who aren't aware of who they are, it's a volunteer-based group, and it's growing. They are vast numbers around the railway network. But the reason why I mention this is because they have, over recent years, put in a lot, and I mean a lot, of hard work around the stations on the Marston Vale Line. Doing some painting, sprucing it up, putting in the flowers, making it look nice for the everyday passenger. And in situations like these, no one's going to see them, and it looks like that there's hard work for no one to be seen. But that's the doom and gloom. Once this is back running, there'll be people again, and the work will be seen by the commuter. So I wanted to touch on that, because they do some fantastic work. And if you haven't been to Ridgemont Heritage Centre when this is back up and running, go visit, because there are some fantastic artifacts that they've got there that just spell out the history of this line. So go check it out when it's open. Not now, of course, unless you want to catch the bus. So now we've had a touch on 3 interesting subjects in terms of who Vivarail are, what do they do, and what does this mean for passengers. Let's cut away, and I would explain to you about what the future holds for the Marston Vale Line and for stations like Fenny Stratford. Let's have a watch of this.
East West Rail is an upcoming railway connecting Oxford to Cambridge once again, after the closure of the former Varsity Line. As you can see, many of the stations of the Marston Vale Line do not appear, apart from Bletchley, Bedford, Ridgemont and Woburn Sands in between, but there is the addition of a brand new station at Winslow. Track laying has begun, along with the work we saw at Bletchley earlier in the episode. However, in the direction to Cambridge, many more projects are set to take place, with trains from Oxford to Milton Keynes to commence their journeys by 2025.
So that's fairly interesting, isn't it? And as like I showed you at Bletchley, they're cracking on very well there. They've got the new flyover done, and the track, I think, goes out as far as, I think it's heading towards Winslow. It may not have reached there. I think it's heading in that direction. I know there's quite a bit done there. And there was a picture someone put up. It was like the first freight locomotive to be on that, down that far in however many years. So the progress, especially on the phase 1 side of things, is cracking on nicely. Now, like I said, you've got stations at Winslow, places like that, onto Bicester Village. If you go in the opposite direction towards Bedford, that is, like I said, where some of the problems do lie. However, I think all in all that could be ironed out, but I think the main focus is the Marston Vale Bletchley to Bedford part, because this is where the problems are and this is where it needs ironing out. So to summarise, yes, it's a good theoretical project that they did. Whether it's, like I said, they've been around since 2012, and to have 10 years with only 3 years in service, if that was me, I would say that wasn't a particularly good outcome, no matter what the variables are. The line itself needs a more reliable set of services that are going to be maintained and not have issues like this, and have a stable, backing or company that isn't going to fall into administration. Of course, there are things that just are unforeseen, but it's another issue. And for the passenger, that is the most important factor, because it's messing with everyday lives. And like I said, with this, add in strikes, it's going to pee a lot of people off. And this is, from what I've seen, the attitude towards an everyday passenger towards the railway is they're getting angrier and angrier and angrier. Now, as a railway lover, as myself, I don't get too angry. I see the disappointment, but again, I like to try and see the bigger picture. But for everyone who just uses it for everyday life, who doesn't have that much of an interest and just use them as an A to B, they need to be brought back on side and shown that, yes, the railways are the one for you. But there's a lot of things that need ironing out, like I said. And, you've got some campaigns. I think Trainline are doing the I Came by Train campaign at the minute, which is fantastic. So check that out as well. It's not all bad. It really isn't. But there is hopefully going to be some light at the end of the tunnel with this. And that resolution needs to be brought sooner. Whether the only option I can first think of is that London North Western will go, right, we'll have something in place to keep the maintenance going and bring them back. Or whether Vivaraill gets bought out by someone different, who knows. So stay tuned with this and we will see how that materialises. But again, I hope you've enjoyed this. I know it's been very, very heavy on the information, but I feel like this is a topic that needs to be discussed and talked about. But nonetheless, I hope and to be fair as well, leave a comment, because it would be nice to hear opinions, what you think. If you're impacted by the line, let me know. It would be good to get a little discussion going, and just find out what other people's thoughts are. I can imagine there are some variations compared to mine, but let me know. But nonetheless, as always, I hope you've enjoyed it, especially though it's a cold early afternoon now, but it is getting towards winter time. So yes, I hope you've enjoyed it, and I will see you on my next episode of Down the Line.